All right, welcome back into Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. Politico with this, saying the White House has developed something akin to a naughty and nice list of NATO countries. This comes as the Trump administration looks for ways to punish allies who are refusing to back the Iran war. The outlet says that officials worked on the effort ahead of NATO head Mark Rutte's visit to Washington this month, and it includes an overview of members' contributions to the alliance and places them into tiers. That's according to 3 European diplomats and a U.S. defense official who spoke with Reuters. Let's bring in retired Marine intelligence officer, national security analyst, and the host of the Strap podcast, Hal Kempfer. He's here with us to discuss this. Hal, if the White House is considering ways to reward NATO allies that it likes, what could that mean for allies that the U.S. isn't so bullish on?
Well, Austin, what it could mean is for the countries they don't like, we could be looking at relocating forces, relocating bases altogether, closing down bases. The president can't pull out of NATO without the concurrence of Congress because it is a NATO, it's a treaty. So he can't just unilaterally pull out of NATO. However, with that said, he does have a lot of discretion on where to send forces, where to send troops, and he can move them around. And we've been moving forces around since the end of the Cold War to various places. Obviously, you saw Spain was giving us a hard time on using their bases to support Epic Fury, the operations against Iran. We're also having problems with Italy in that regard. And we're also having problems with Britain initially in that regard as well. So these are all countries, I think, that he's going to be looking at very closely. And my understanding is that certainly Spain is on the, quote, naughty list, and Britain appears to be on the naughty list. Ironically, though, they have actually improved the amount of spending on defense matters per GDP significantly from where they were. They're well behind where they need to be, but they have been improving. But the countries that he really liked that were up front were the ones that tend to be a little bit east and spending more money.
The ones that tend to be a little bit closer to Russia. What message does this send to Russia at a moment when NATO is trying to show unity?
Well, Russia and certainly Putin has always had a top agenda to somehow break up NATO. And, President Trump had some very strong things to say about NATO during his first term. He's definitely had some extremely strong things, as have members of his administration, to say about members of NATO in this term. We have stopped providing aid for the most part. We will sell stuff to Ukraine, but we don't have those big expenditures of sending aid to Ukraine to fight Russia like we did. We do it some intelligence sharing and things like that, and we're certainly willing to sell them stuff, but we're not willing to just give them stuff. And that's been a big change with this administration. That's a big shift in U.S. policy. So from that perspective, obviously Russia would see this as a positive step. The other side, though, is it depends on what happens. If, for example, he likes on the nice list, so to speak, was the Baltic states, Estonia, Lithuania specifically. Latvia wasn't mentioned, but I'm pretty sure it's grouped in there. I would imagine he's pretty pleased with Finland overall. Poland was definitely mentioned. Romania was definitely mentioned. All of these are eastern parts. All of these have a big reason to spend more money on defense because they face Russia. And we've already been moving some troops from Germany to Poland. Poland actually subsidizes. They pay for our troops to live there. Germany does not do that, or at least doesn't do it nearly as much. So I could see us potentially moving more forces further east, which would make sense. Germany, Western Germany, I should say, was on the front line of the Cold War. Well, it's not anymore. Now Poland is, now the Baltic states are. So we could certainly look at maybe moving forces into the Baltic states, moving forces into Poland, and we've already been moving some forces into Romania. We may improve that or increase that more. So that's something the president might do.
The next NATO summit is in July in Turkey. How could this shape the next summit, and could it shape the decisions that are made there if there is a list like this?
I think it could shape it. One of the things which is rather interesting has nothing so much to do with GDP, but it does have a lot to do with how the president feels about things, is NATO countries that have been reluctant to support our operations in Epic Fury and against Iran. And obviously, the president's been very vocal about that lack of support by NATO across the board, but certainly some countries really stand out. France and Britain among them, specifically mentioned. Spain, obviously mentioned. So that seems to be a big criteria, and I think that's going to be brought up a lot at the NATO summit. And that, I don't know if that's going to be a deciding criteria, but it's certainly a big decision that they're going to be making. Here's a little sidebar for you. Ukraine, which of course, Russia had mined the Black Sea. Ukraine has 4 minesweepers in Britain that are supposed to go over to the Black Sea after the war is over. Well, the war's not over, but the minesweepers are ready. There's a good chance that those minesweepers could end up in the Strait of Hormuz sweeping mines, which is good because the 4 minesweepers we had previously in the Persian Gulf they all left. 2 of them have recently returned, but we're desperately in need of minesweepers. So that kind of throws an interesting, I don't know if you want to say a monkey wrench into the tiering system, but if Britain is down there helping the Ukrainians with mine clearing operations in the Strait, maybe the dynamic will shift. Maybe Britain's place on the naughty and nice list might shift a little bit.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I was reading some reports about this. Ukraine is reportedly ready to send mine hunters from the United Kingdom to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz. We'll wait for some official word on that, but for now, that's what's being reported by news outlets. You got me wondering, where does the idea of Ukraine joining NATO stand at this point?
Well, the U.S. has not been vocal in favor of it, and we tend to see it as if we say that it's going to join NATO, then Russia will say absolutely not, and they'll never get over the war. And I think President Trump still thinks he's going to be able to somehow impose peace with the Russia-Ukraine war without, basically Ukraine militarily decisively defeating Russia. And it just hasn't happened. We've seen this going back and forth. It just hasn't happened. But the reality is that if Russia was decisively defeated, if Russia was forced to withdraw from Ukraine, there's a lot of ifs going in that, all right? But if that were to happen, probably would be predicated on a regime change in Moscow, would be my guess. But if all that happens, I think that everything would change as far as Ukraine joining NATO. The other thing, too, is Ukraine putting minesweepers down the Strait of Hormuz. Ukraine is down there helping all our Gulf allies with anti-drone capability, drone interceptors. Ukraine is really stepping up in a big way with helping support indirectly what we're doing in the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz. So who knows? Maybe there'll be a shift in feeling in Washington, D.C.
You're a strategic risk assessment expert. What's the real risk to ordinary people if there is some sort of growing rift or even bigger rift within the NATO alliance?
Well, the rift is you have some major powers there, economic powers. And the rift would be if NATO was to fall apart, that they could start separately doing things that could punish the U.S. They do have a lot of economic clout. They have relationships all over the world, places where we need natural resources, places where we have markets. And it is foreseeable at some point in the future that European countries could really, our pulling back from engagement with Europe means that Europe may step up and become more assertive. And that assertiveness may not always align with what the U.S. wants to do. And that's the risk of pulling back. On the one hand, we want them to step up. We want them to contribute more. We want them to, the days of them kind of blindly relying on the U.S. to save them from a security standpoint. I think it's been pretty clear that is not the case, that they have to make an effort to save themselves as well. And but the other side is, and I've seen this firsthand with my consulting in various different places, that sometimes we are at odds with our European allies because they have certain natural resource or trade needs, and they want to definitely get what they need first and foremost.
Hal Kempfer is a retired Marine intelligence officer and the host of the Strat podcast. You can listen to Strat anywhere podcasts are available. Thanks, Hal.